Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Inside Leather History, a Fireside Chat. My name is Doug O'Keefe. I have the distinct pleasure today and the honor of interviewing a true community icon. Welcome, Mr. Baldwin. Thank you for joining Inside Leather History, a Fireside Chat.
Why, thank you. It's an honor to be here. And on behalf of the Council of Icons, I'm very happy to be here.
We did a bit of a pre-chat yesterday because there was so much information to cover. But I have a whole different interview available for you today. So I hope we'll cover some very good information. But to that end, let's start right at the beginning. Please tell us a bit about where you grew up and a bit about your family.
Well, I was raised by Italian wolves, known as the Posts and the Baldwins, I guess, in Colorado. Let me see, what else do I want to say about that? I keep trying to find something interesting in my early background that will be of some use to the kinds of people who are going to be paying attention to this. And the thing I suppose that comes most readily to mind is a story that I sometimes tell about my grandmother when I was a little boy, and I mean a little boy, 8, 7 years old. I used to spend summers with her, and she liked to play Chinese checkers with me. And whenever that fat hand of hers would move across the Chinese checkerboard, all kinds of hell broke loose underneath the hand, and suddenly I'd lost my position. Now, I'm not quite sure what kind of a woman cheats her grandson at Chinese checkers, but my grandmother did. She was quite a character. One of the things that she liked to do was put my hand into her mouth like that and bite it until I would start to cry and scream, and finally had to yank my hand out of her mouth, and I'd say, "No, Grandma, why do you bite me so much?" And she'd say, "Because I love you so much." So it isn't too hard to understand where some of the roots of my own kinkiness came from. I, mixed love and pain together from a fairly early age. But Italian wolves. The other thing that's of some use, I think, to recall about my upbringing is that when you're raised in a household of Italian wolves, there's a lot of competition for airtime. And so if you couldn't talk, if you couldn't hold your own in conversation with these relatives of mine, you just didn't exist. You weren't important. You didn't show up on anybody's radar. Nobody paid any attention to you. So from a fairly early age, I learned some verbal skills that I think have served me, and I hope my communities, fairly well ever since.
What are some of those skills?
Oh, hell, I don't know. You'd have to ask the community. Well, I don't know. I'm smart. I think on my feet pretty fast. I think for many years as a young man, one of the central problems of my existence was fear. And fear for a long time was kind of the axis around which my life revolved. And one day, I'm not quite sure when, maybe it was when I yanked my hand out of my grandmother's mouth, I'm not sure. I decided that I was not going to be fear's victim any longer. And so, when I started feeling afraid of something, I made myself move toward it rather than away from it. With the attitude of, if it's going to kill me, then kill me. But I refuse to be terrorized any longer by anything. And it's not true that I'm not afraid of anything anymore. Insanity scares me when I'm in its presence. Psychopaths scare me still. Drunk drivers scare me quite a bit. But other stuff, not so much. I like to move toward things that I find intimidating until I can get on the other side of him. And I think that's been a fairly useful survival skill for me over the years. Because I don't like being frightened. I really don't like it.
Please tell us about Mr. Cain, your leather father.
Leather father. Well, Jim Cain was a very interesting guy, exactly 20 years older than me. He was the first man I ever saw in full leather back when the earth was cooling, a long time ago, in one of the first times I ever went into a gay men's leather bar. And I found him so intimidating. I tried to get near him the first time I ever saw him. I was, I think, 18 or 19. And he had walked into the bar a few feet and leaned against the wall, just inside the door. Full leather, bike cap, dark glasses on, inside at night, big aviator glasses. And he just sat there, and I tried to move toward him, and I got within about 6 feet, and I discovered I really couldn't get any closer to him. It was like this force field around him somehow. Anyway, years later, pardon me, years later, I met him. He was one of the founding members of the Rocky Mountaineers Motorcycle Club, the club that took me in and parented me after my own family threw me away when I was 18. My mother found out I was gay shortly after my high school graduation. And her comment about that was, "I ain't no homosexual going to be living under my roof. You have a week to pack and get out." And so I did. Went to Denver, pardon me, moved into a rooming house, and shortly thereafter ran into my first Leatherman in a gay bar. And they took me under their wing, kind of like a mascot, I guess, and looked after me, realized I was smart, and insisted I go to college. They wouldn't let me go on motorcycle runs unless I brought homework with me and reading. "What are you reading?" They'd ask me about it.
Wow.
And when it was time for me to graduate, they got on their motorcycles and rode the 35 miles from Denver to Boulder and attended my college graduation. I think that the few family members that turned up were pretty confused by all that. They kind of didn't know what to make of all these heavy-duty Leathermen who were fawning over their sort of kid relative. And I spent more time with the guys than I did with my own family. Anyway, Jim Cain was one of those guys. Turns out Jim had been a Roman Catholic priest and was without a parish. He had a doctorate in journalism from Loyola, I think, in Chicago, if memory serves. And he and his slave, Ike Barnes, lived in San Francisco. And Jim and Ike were kind of leather grand dames in San Francisco's leather society at the time. They had dinner parties, and of course it was a very cool thing to be invited to a dinner party at Jim and Ike's. And Jim was a pretty formidable guy. Anyway, one day my phone rang, and he said, answered the phone, "Hello? Guy Baldwin." "Yes, yes, sir." "My slave, Ike, is going to be visiting his family in Oklahoma soon, and I would appreciate the pleasure of your company over the weekend while he's away." And I said, "Well, the honor would be mine, sir." "And where and when?" And he said, "Well, you may present yourself at my front door." He's a very formal kind of guy. "You may present yourself at my front door at exactly 8 p.m. on Friday evening." And I said, "The address, please," because I'd never been invited to one of these exclusive dinner parties before. And he said, have you a pencil? Yes. The address is number 11 Pink Alley. Ah. And I thought he was kidding maybe for a minute. I mean, what kind of a Butch Leatherman lives on Pink Alley? So I said, I'm sorry, there's some static on the line. Can you repeat? Yes, number 11 Pink Alley. I thought, man, this is a put on. I'm being sent on a wild goose chase. These guys are screwing with me. So, yes, I'll be there. What would you like me to wear? Well, boots, Levi's, and a leather jacket. I said, I don't own a leather jacket yet. Well, then a Levi jacket, that'll be satisfactory. So I appeared there, but I went around first, of course, and consulted a map because I needed to know exactly where this exotic address was. So I found 11 Pink Alley just off Market Street, and there was only one house on 11 Pink Alley, and it was number 11 Pink Alley. Those of you who've heard me talk about this before know that the number 11 has almost mystical significance for me. But it didn't at that time. And so I showed up and walked in the door and I said, you may fold your clothes and place them right there. I did. Anyway, over a 3-day period, Jim played with me. And periodically we'd get tired and come up the stairs from his dungeon, and he would read to me from the discourses of Epictetus or from the memoirs of Hadrian. Wow. And I was reading all this esoteric stuff from these amazing Roman people who had all these lofty thoughts, and I would sit at his feet and sort of look up at it and dazzled that here was this twisted guy, oh my God, what we did downstairs would curl your hair. But who was brilliant, who was bright, who was articulate, who was sensitive, who was just an amazing guy. And he really became my first mentor. I became his acolyte, and then later his protege, and he made it his business to download into my head everything that he knew and understood about radical sex.
Amazing.
It's a long answer for a short question, but there it is.
But let's take one step back. You worked for the railroad at one time.
I did, that's true. Right out of high school, I worked as a brakeman switchman for the Union Pacific Railroad. I like to joke that it's where I got my first butch lessons. But it really wasn't. I got those from my uncle's dude ranch when I used to wrangle horses there. But yeah, I was a brakeman on the Union Pacific Railroad for about, I think about 8 months. That would have been the summer, fall, and winter of 1965.
When you left Colorado and went to San Francisco, you had quite a first night in the city. Please tell us about that.
Well, I graduated after summer school from the University of Colorado, and I was on a jet plane that night. I did not let the sun set on me in Colorado. I wanted out of that state and into San Francisco. I was afraid of San Francisco because these amazing stories would drift over the Rocky Mountains about all of the cool stuff that happened in San Francisco. And I knew that by then I had become a big fish in a small pond in Denver because I had played with all the guys that would play with me. And in those days it was tough for a young guy to get the attention of any of the serious players because none of them figured that they could possibly have a good time with a kid who was so young and knew so little. So they didn't waste their time with me. They wanted to play with other experienced players. But by then I had played with all of the headline players in Denver who would play with me. And I was plenty ready to outgrow the Denver scene. So I got on a jet plane the night I graduated from college and flew to San Francisco, got off the plane, took a bus into San Francisco, and checked into the Golden State Hotel on Powell Street, a couple block and a half off Market. And I remember walking from the bus station up to the hotel, and the streets on Nob Hill in San Francisco have mica in them, and they glittered like diamonds in them. And I thought, my God, even the streets in this town are paved with diamonds. I am in the right place at last. So I checked into the Golden State Hotel. I had a minor in geography. So I had a map with me that I knew how to read. That's always a good thing. And I knew the right bar to go to. I was headed down to Folsom Street to find the Ramrod Bar, which in those days was the flagship bar in San Francisco. And I rounded the corner on, I think it would have been 9th or 10th. And from 2 blocks away, I could see that in front of the bar were 50, 60 motorcycles stacked up. And I could see Leatherman coming and going. And I was across the street from the bar, and I walked up, and there was a flower pot, something to sit on. And I sat down, and I watched all these guys coming and going, and there was a little black leather curtain in the front door that people would push through to go into the bar. And I sat there and realized that my life was at a fulcrum moment. I thought, you know, once I walk through that door, I am never going to be the same. And I just savored the moment, you know. I had stayed away from San Francisco because I was afraid that if I visited in the summer, I would never complete my undergraduate education, that I would get swept up into the flesh pots of San Francisco in, you know, in the 1970s, before HIV, remember. So, I mean, you see it, you want it, you get it, you have it, you like it, or you don't. And it was just about that simple. So there were no brakes on male sexuality at that time, at all. Wow. Yeah, it's a completely different universe than the one we live in now. So I was finally ready to voluntarily walk into the flesh pot and get lost behind those black curtains. And I just sort of savored the moment. I looked around, I smelled how the city smelled, I looked up at the sky, I kind of took photographs with my head of this moment in my life, because I knew it was never going to be the same. Sure enough, when I was ready, I waited for the traffic to clear. And I walked into the Ramrod, and it was packed with leather guys, head to toe leather. The smell of sweat and leather and beer mixed together in a kind of ambrosiac drug kind of thing. It was like, what the hell is this? This was distilled masculinity raised to 4 magnitudes of intensity beyond anything I ever imagined possible. And I was this young thing from Denver, ready to be taken and taught the ways of the flesh. And so I began to migrate my way towards the back. But the back 6 feet of the Ramrod were the most dangerous territory in that city, because the back 6 feet of the Ramrod were occupied by San Francisco's big sharks. And they would troll back there. You could sort of see them. And it was about 6 months I'd lived in San Francisco before I felt like I was willing to risk stepping into that. You know, there was no line on the floor. There was just this territory in the back that you knew damn well that once you stepped back there, you were chum for the big sharks that trolled back there. And one best tread there with great care, and I did. I didn't play a lot. I was pretty discriminating. People have asked me before whether I played a lot in the mid to late 70s, and the answer is no, I really didn't. But I wanted to play with quality guys. And I picked and chose, and I chose and chose very carefully. And started to get a reputation as somebody who knew what they were doing. And then I really did turn into chum. I wasn't handed around. Me, slut? No, I wasn't. I wanted to be a slut, sort of, but it just didn't appeal to me. Anyway, Jim Cain was my mentor during all that time. And I would get into this trouble or that trouble, or be confused by this or that. And then I would take those conversations to Jim, and I would, you know, he was, ironically, you know, Italian recovering Catholic boy. He was my parish priest, in a funny way. He was a neat guy, stuffy, proud, arrogant, condescending. But he had a slave, Ike Barnes, and Ike Barnes was quite a piece of work. Ike Barnes worked for Procter & Gamble, and he was the Procter & Gamble hatchet man. Procter & Gamble would think about acquiring a company, and they would send Ike in. And Ike would go to the president and show his credentials, and then he would go down to the warehouse. And he would ask the warehouseman to teach him his job. Ike worked his way all the way up through the company, and then would go back to the board at Procter & Gamble and say, you need to fire this guy, you need to promote that guy, you need to replace this guy, and they'd put him in as president, and he would make all those changes and then leave. But when he walked in the door at 11 Pink Alley, he was on his knees, stripped, was on his knees, and his collar hung on a nail inside the door, and he would take his collar and hold his collar, and Jim would come and lock his collar around his neck.
Wonderful.
So this was an extraordinarily powerful guy who had also played as a defensive tackle for Ohio State University. You know, he's a big, strong dude. But he was Jim Cain's slave, left, right, and center. And was until he died.
Wow.
And those two guys were my first serious exposure to master-slave stuff.
Well, please tell us about your first SMC.
Well, we're back in Denver now. And I was an undergraduate student at the University of Colorado, and would come in to, I had a bartending job at Denver's, what I think is Denver's first real leather bar. Anyway, there was a guy who used to come in, and his name was Big Ed. And Big Ed was a big man, he was a big man. And he, I don't know what kind of work he did, but he was an amateur singer and sung basso profundo for the Denver Light Opera. And he had this deep baritone voice, about 2 octaves below mine. And jovial, kind of a Falstaffian sort of character. And I wanted to play with him. It was hard to get his attention, I remember. But one day he said to me, how old was I? I was 21? I guess I was 21 or 22. He said, how would you like to come up into the mountains with me and visit me at my cabin so that I can have my way with you? And I said, well, I think that's a great idea. And he said, well, be at the corner of such and such and so-and-so at 8 p.m. on Friday evening, and I will roll through that intersection one time. And if you are there with your thumb out, I will pick you up. And we will go up into the mountains together. And if you are not, you won't. you can be sure that I was hitching a ride. I had to wave a bunch of people off before Ed finally did come through that intersection. But he did come through that intersection about 5 minutes late, as I recall. And up into the mountains we went. Well, he, you know, no details, really. But Ed's cabin was a A-frame that he built himself. It had no water, it had no electricity, it had no power, it had no bottled gas, and it was about 3.5 hours outside of Denver, you know, remote. You could have lit a stick of dynamite and it would have gone off and nobody would have heard it. Was I stupid? You bet I was stupid. I wouldn't think about going to that sort of a remote place with some dude who I didn't know very well now. But kids are stupid, so we do stupid things, and so I went. Anyway, we definitely did have his way with me, and he introduced me to something that I have since called predicament bondage. I probably don't have to explain what that means to this crowd. This is probably a pretty literate group. But he messed with me a lot. Anyway, the next morning, he said, "Fix me some breakfast, boy." "Yes, sir. I'll be happy to fix you some breakfast." "What would you like, sir?" "Well, I'd like 3 eggs and some bacon." It was wood fire, outdoors, cooking over fire.
Wow.
And I had done that before, so I wasn't nervous about that. Not only that, I was pretty handy in the kitchen. I know how to crack eggs with one hand, you know, very showy. So 3 eggs, did you say? "Yes, sir." Or, "Yes, sir, 3 eggs." "Yes, sir, that'll be fine." So I open up the egg carton and I pick 3 eggs. Flash. Not those 3. Oops, screwed up. So he introduced me to punishment sex in that way. So I scraped the eggs into the fire. "Which 3 would you like?" I presented the egg carton. He said, "I want that one and that one and that one." And so I cooked breakfast and survived. But it wasn't because I picked the wrong eggs. I had other talents. Anyway, that was the first BDSM scene that I could that really is worthy of the name. I'd had rough sex with guys before, but that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted this SM stuff because I knew that the whips and chains thing was where it was at, but I didn't know anything about it. I knew that was where the fun was. And it was.
Building upon that a little bit, what is an SM scene to you?
Well, we talked about this a little bit the other day, or yesterday. I was raised in Colorado, and I therefore had to become a skier. It's kind of obligatory. And there is a condition in skiing that one gets to where you come around a corner and there's a mogul there. There's a sort of trench in the snow, for those of you who don't ski. And you come around the corner and your speed is perfect. And you fall into the corner and the centrifugal and the centripetal forces are balanced perfectly. And you come in and you go, "Oh yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be." And the temperature is perfect, the snow is ideal, your skis are tracking beautifully, and you go, "Oh, hell yeah, this is exactly the way it's supposed to be." And at those moments, you lose all your identifications. You stop being identified with he who is male, he who is white, he who has a salt and pepper beard, he who's got a cap on, he who is tall, he who's wearing boots, he who is gay, he who is straight. All of those awarenesses, all those identifications of yourself fall away. And you become one, what some spiritual traditions call one-pointed. You become completely centered and completely relaxed in that state, and completely mindless about all that you are. There is no past, there is no future. The present is unfolding with a kind of instantaneous and infinitely dimensional reality that is unmatched in any other experience. Take that experience and couple it with an erotic turbocharger, and an ideal scene unfolds with those kinds of feelings. And when that happens, for me, the distinctions between myself and who I'm with become irrelevant. They stop mattering. They disappear. And I don't know where I stop and the other person starts. And that can happen with conventional sexuality too. What's different for me is that at those moments, a kind of cathartic portal opens for me. For anybody who saw the movie Stargate, there's a moment when the Stargate first opens and there's this huge kind of pool of water that's vertical, and it flashes out into the room in a very kind of dramatic way. For me, my experience of that isn't blue, it's orange. And that portal is larger than my vision will encompass. And that portal then, for me, becomes a lens through which anything I'm interested in stands revealed.
Wow.
And if I choose to think about astrophysics, then or quantum mechanics, or any of the stuff in nature that interests me, then suddenly it takes on a kind of crystalline purity for me and reveals itself in ways that it had not before. Under ideal circumstances, the person that I'm with in that kind of scene experiences a similar transformation. Because for me, this kind of radical sexuality must have as a central component the capacity for static. It must have the capacity for transformation. I don't want to be the same person coming out of an experience that I was going in it. I demand that my sexuality and the exercise of it have a transformational consequence for me. I don't want to be the same guy coming out of it that I was going in it. So I place burdens on my sexual expression that I know many people do not. But I'm a pig, and I'm demanding of life. I want to wring from the experience of being in the world as much richness as I can, because I'm a pig, and I want more. I want more. I want more out of my contact with people. I want more out of my sex life. I want more out of my politicians. I want more out of the air. I approach life with a kind of chronic craving. But I have great digestive juices, so I feel satisfied a great deal of the time. So you ask what an ideal BDSM scene is for me. It's a scene that has those elements in it. And I suppose that for me, radical sexuality is my religion. And I rely upon it to ground me in the world. It is the black and blue lens through which I look at the world, and through which the world reveals itself to me. I think everyone needs a lens through which to view the world and their experience in it. And I feel sorry for people who don't have a lens yet, or haven't found one, or haven't ground a lens for themselves that they can deploy to cause the universe to reveal itself to them, and the other people to be revealed to them. We all have an extraordinary set of capabilities that mostly go to waste. You know, you walk into a 7-Eleven store that you've never been in before, and you go up to the counter with a pack of gum or to buy whatever you want to buy, and you suss out the person behind the counter. And you immediately know whether or not you can be playful with that person based on the vibe that you're able to read. Well, how do you do that? You do that with your internal scanner. We all have a scanner, unless you happen to have some kind of brain damage or unless you're psychotic. You're equipped with a scanner that goes, you know, to people.
I have another mic for you.
Is there something wrong with this mic?
Yes, oh, fairness.
Just a moment, as if one mic wasn't enough. And those are capabilities that nobody ever pays any attention to, and that your folks don't tell you about. But we have amazing capacity to sense one another, and this culture doesn't do anything to amplify those capabilities or to draw our attention to those capabilities when we're young, when they're most easily developed, right? It's like language skills in a way. And those abilities constitute a piece of the lens through which we have the ability to get what other people are about quickly, and to suss out who we want to be closer to, and who we want to be farther away from, and who we want to have our relationship and our connection stay exactly the way it is, now and forevermore. Yes, like that.
I read with considerable pleasure the following quote: "I see BDSM sexuality as rather like an AK-47 assault rifle. I don't want it in the hands of just anyone who shows up and is curious." Would you please explain that?
Does it need an explanation?
What did you mean by that?
Well, I meant that, well, I have a very Taoist view of reality. And when we think about the Tao, the people understand that most easily as the yin and yang symbol that we're all kind of familiar with. And I like that symbol. If I had to leave the planet with one symbol to keep me squared away, it would probably be that one. Because it reminds me that anything that's powerful can create in exactly equal proportion to which it can destroy. You know, and if you think about the things that are powerful, wind, water, fire, nuclear energy, all those things are indisputably powerful, right? And they can create and destroy. And, you know, one doesn't have to think for more than a few milliseconds to remind oneself of the creative capabilities of any of those things that I just named. But those are all forces of nature, right? Nuclear energy is a force of nature. It's what fuels the sun. But other things are powerful. Love is powerful. It can create, and it certainly can destroy. Anybody who's got gray hair has probably had the experience of both by now, if not sooner. Love of God and devotion to Pope drove the Crusades, for God's sake. And we don't need to understand the creative and destructive power of religion. Pardon me. And it stands to reason that anything else in the universe that has a name or hasn't yet been named, gravity can create and destroy. Sexuality is pretty powerful stuff too, so it stands to reason that it too can create in exactly equal proportion to which it can destroy. And when I say I want AK-47 sexuality out of the hands of teenagers, it's because I do not trust them to know the difference between creation and destruction. If you're all familiar with the Disney piece from Fantasia, where Mickey is the sorcerer's apprentice,
yes.
And the sorcerer comes in. He's this old, wizened guy with a white hair and beard, and a pointed hat, and he's wearing a cloak, and it's got stars and crescents on it. And he's got a spell book, and he's casting, doing all this stuff that he does, magic. And Mickey is kind of dazzled, but yeah, Mickey's just an apprentice, and he's carrying water. Sorcerer gets tired, as old men do, and went to sleep, and Mickey decides he's going to grab the spell book, right, and make his life a little easier. So he does just that, and the next thing you know, he's got all these brooms carrying water, but he knows how to turn the spell on all right, but he doesn't know how to turn it off. And nearly drowns. Fortunately, the commotion created by his misuse of the spell makes enough racket that it wakens the sorcerer, and the sorcerer comes in and with a wave of his hand restores order and balance to all of this. When we use radical sexuality, we are functioning as sorcerers. We are sourcing radical energies, and we are fabricating experiences with them, moment by moment, using our creativity and our spontaneity, hopefully our education and our knowledge, to produce altered states of consciousness and that thing I mentioned a minute ago, transformation. You better know how to turn the spell off and what the hell you're doing with it. And that's why I want this sexuality kept out of the hands of kids. And those kids don't have to be teenagers. They can be 60 years old and not know how to undo the spells. You know, it's one of the reasons I've been so concerned about watching the tent flaps in the radical sex world go up. There was a time when people used to be vetted to have this knowledge. And I see some of the old hands in the room nodding their heads because you didn't get anywhere near people who knew how this stuff worked until they had vetted you, until your qualifications to be in possession of the magic spells that, you know, make radical sexuality work. But now, you know, anybody can, you know, pay a $5 fee and walk into a class on breath control, for God's sake. It's crazy. It's amazing. We don't have more accidents than we do. In Los Angeles, not all that long ago, somebody was doing some performance BDSM stuff, and boy, please don't get me started on that, because I have really strong and negative feelings about performance BDSM. And a young girl had her lung punctured. Wow. And was, you know, an ambulance was called, and she was sent off to the hospital, and her parents absolutely were furious and wanted her to press charges, and she refused, and the DA looked into it and said, well, it was a performance accident, so no charges were brought.
Wow.
AK-47. She's lucky she didn't die. And accidents are happening with increased frequency as people become more and more interested in the world of outside-the-box sexuality. These kinds of things are going to happen. The need for vetting has never been stronger, and it's never been weaker. Anyway, sorry, I digress, because I can, I guess.
I don't mind.
Anyway.
When we were preparing for this chat, you spoke about picking up the sword and the shield.
Oh.
How and when have you done that?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm really the right person to answer that question, to be honest, because I think the community in some ways is better positioned to assess the value of my life's work than I am. I have tried to deploy my capabilities on behalf of people who practice outside-the-box sexuality. Because I think the community needs the best that's in us. And I've got an unusual combination of capabilities. And I have placed them in the service of us. Because I can, and because I'm one of us. I do not like to fight battles that other people can fight as well or better than I can. So I try only to pick up the sword when I see that there is a battle that no one else seems to be willing to engage. And that's what the keynote speech was about the other night. Yeah, I know it wasn't particularly uplifting or maybe necessarily even very inspiring, and I don't care. My job is to make us think about things that we don't want to think about. And I have that reputation in our community, and I'm proud of it. I'm not here to entertain particularly. We have entertainers. I'm not here to educate, really. We have fabulous educators. I don't need to do that anymore. The educational chapters of my life are mostly behind me. Because I've taught, BDSM classes 60 ways from Sunday for 30 years. I don't need to do that anymore. There are other people who can do that. So those are swords and shields I do not pick up if there are other people around who I'm confident can. Because by now I'm fairly Teflon coated. That was one of the reasons, that vest that I wore with arrows coming out of it, that was a sight gag. Yeah, it was fun. But I also wanted to send a message with that. I can survive criticism. I'm not afraid of stirring up a hornet's nest and seeing what comes of it. But I want us to talk about these things that are hard to talk about. Any idiot can provoke conversation about the easy things. That's not hard to do. I want us to talk about the hard things. And I want to make it okay for us to do that. And what the hell was your question?
It was about picking up the sword and
Oh,
the shield.
yeah, that, what you said. You get old people talking and they're
Well, the Jefferson Memorial here
yes.
in DC had a profound influence upon you.
It did indeed.
Please tell us about that.
Well, I came to Washington for the very first time in 1987 for the Gay and Lesbian March on Washington. And 1987 was a tough time in the gay and lesbian world. We didn't have drugs for HIV. Guys were dropping like flies. There was a 62-week period when I went to at least one memorial service a week. And people who didn't go through that really will never have any understanding or appreciation for the nightmare that it was. And it was made more of a nightmare by virtue of the fact that the rest of the society seemed to be able to shop for groceries without any apparent awareness of that, and people were moving through contemporary American culture while this fucking nightmare was exploding around us, left, right, and center. And it was weird, it was odd, it was surreal. So we came to Washington because we wanted to get funding for the FDA. We wanted to make President Reagan mention the word AIDS at some point somehow, but he wouldn't. And we were here to do that. Anyway, you may have seen the picture of me at the March on Washington the other night if you were in the keynote. I was carrying a sign that said, "Diversity is American." I had made that sign the day before from a trash barrel. Anyway, one of my patients had said, gee, if you're going to Washington, D.C., and if you see nothing else there, go to the Jefferson Memorial. And this patient had been around, and I thought, you know, that seems like it's probably pretty good advice. I'll have time to see one and only one thing in D.C. Can't go to it in the Smithsonian because that takes a long time to really do a museum justice. So I thought, well, okay, Jefferson Memorial sounds good. So off to the Jefferson Memorial I went. And I walked in, and I was with Race Bannon, Mike Pierce, his boyfriend, Fred Katz, Henry Romanofsky, and some other pervert friends. We were all going to be in the leather contingent going down Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House when you still could. Anyway, so I'm at the Jefferson Memorial, and I'm reading, there's text, you know, there's a section of text there. That's nice. And I look over there, and there's another section of text, and I read that. And that was nice. But it was nice, and so I didn't bother reading the other text. Then I glanced up in the cupola, and I started to read the words. I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility over all forms of tyranny over the mind of man. I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility over all forms of tyranny over the mind of man. And it went through me like a sword of truth. And I collapsed. I fell on my knees, and I started to weep.
Wow.
And I could not stop crying. And in that moment, I understood that all those monumental buildings, unlike foreign capitals, ours are erected for the glorification of ideas, not people, not triumph. And I understood because I was reading about what I perceived to be my own destiny, because I too have taken that same pledge, I think. But it had never been like reduced to a single thing. And I invite you all to embrace that pledge, because it has the power to transform humanity. Anything that can do that can't be all bad. I'm not sure I have anything else to say after that.
I would like to thank you very much for an amazing interview, Mr. Baldwin.
You're welcome.
Thank you.